To start the story, we need to go back. And I mean way back. Back before Enerjak even, and to be honest, back before mostly anything. This is the beginning, and in the beginning on Mobius, much like in the Book of Genesis, there was nothing but darkness until suddenly there was light. On Mobius, echidnas were the first species to evolve out of the primordial ooze. The echidnas pretty quickly developed their intelligence, and pretty shortly after, other species would soon begin to follow. At one point, the other animals on Mobius decided that it would be for the best to pool their knowledge together as to build one of the most ideal civilizations where everybody contributed something. But the echidnas decided that it would actually be for the best if they went their separate ways, as the echidnas feared that in the wrong hands their advanced technology could cause more harm than good. The echidna people quite frankly prospered on their own, and that was done in no small part due to the fact that they studied extensively chaos energy, which emanated from the Chaos Emeralds. Two such researchers of chaos energy had gained the attention of the ancient walkers, and these two were given the opportunity to shed their corporeal forms and ascend into the chaos force, kind of like force ghosts. Those two researchers were actually Enerjak and his love interest, Aurora La. Although Aurora La transcended and became a sort of force of good as she became a benevolent goddess, her significant other Enerjak soon found himself to be corrupted by the power and was deemed to be even too much of a threat for the ancient walkers to destroy. So the only option they had was to scatter Enerjak throughout the chaos force. And of course, this isn't the end of Enerjak, or this video would be much shorter. Enerjak would continue to reincarnate himself inside of new hosts as time went on. The first host was during the Forgotten War, a time that, like the name suggests, was forgotten to many, and as such there isn't a ton of info on this version of Enerjak. It's assumed that, like Enerjak, this host was a chaos scientist who also found himself to be corrupted by the power. And this would eventually lead to the two warring factions during this Forgotten War, with one side actually being a group dedicated to Aurora La to put aside their differences and face on Enerjak, although how they managed to defeat Enerjak or any details about what he had done are completely lost to time. Now, these two events we've looked at with Enerjak so far happened thousands of years before any of the current pre-Genesis wave freedom fighter stuff that we're used to looking at. And so, although we're going to be fast forwarding a little bit, we're still a few hundred years away as we look at the next Enerjak, who was an echidna named Dimitri. Dimitri was a direct descendant of the echidnas who had managed to initially lift Echidnapolis out of the ground thanks to the power of the Chaos Emeralds, and in doing so, they managed to avoid an incoming asteroid. And I guess science really seems to flourish in this family. Now, fun fact, Dimitri is actually Knuckles' great-great-granduncle, and that's because according to Ken Penders, pretty much every echidna is related to Knuckles in some way or another if they're important. He and his brother Edmund, who was actually the first guardian of the Emeralds, were each researchers looking into a way to return Echidnapolis to the ground, and they had devised a way to do so by using a chaos siphoning device. This device would slowly lower the floating islands back into the ground, and they would rejoin Mobius. This notion, however, was ultimately shut down by the Echidna Council, due to the Council's idea of limiting the use of access technology. This caused an enraged Dimitri to take matters into his own hands. He attempted to use the Chaos Siphon device on his own, but this device was unfortunately overloaded by the sheer force of the Chaos Emeralds. The device would then explode and disappear along with Dimitri and all but one of the Chaos Emeralds that the Echidnas possessed. This meant that the floating city now had to rely on just one Chaos Emerald. This was discovered by Edmund, but before Edmund had much time to worry, Dimitri returned, fused with chaos energy and corrupted by Enerjak, who had by this point begun to take hold. This new Enerjak decided that he would lay waste to Mobius and reshape it in his own vision as he created a very evil-looking dark tower. Enerjak would enslave Echidnapolis, with its citizens' plan to pull a floating city across Mobius as Enerjak lay waste to everything in his path. Luckily, the echidnas were saved by an unlikely ally. Although the echidnas had left the other species and didn't really talk to any of them, they did always have close ties with the fire ants, who actually managed to chew through this dark tower and caused it to collapse onto Enerjak. This Dimitri/Enerjak was then assumed to be dead by even his own son Maneker, but it wouldn't be long before his son would notice an ominous chaos glow from the rubble, and this glow would go on to corrupt Maneker and would lead him to form a group known as the Dark Legion. The Dark Legion is this technocratic cult, which means that they really like technology, like maybe a little bit too much. And this cult came at a pretty good time because it managed to rally the echidnas who were against the council's idea to limit the use of technology. And these people would go on to be a threatening force for centuries to come. Dimitri would spend centuries of his life buried underneath the rubble of his tower, unable to die due to his link with Enerjak, who still inhabited him, which led to, understandably, his growing madness. Eventually, Enerjak would escape the tomb, and in a demonstration of power, he would send Knuckles and Archimedes into the desert via teleportation. Knuckles and Archie would travel through the desert until ultimately arriving at Enerjak's new fortress, this time not a tower, but a whole citadel. Knuckles in this citadel would have to fight his mind-controlled friends as well as Enerjak. Now listen, I kid you not, Enerjak is yet again foiled by fire ants. These guys manage to get a rocket and it sends the citadel into space with Enerjak in it. Listen, I'm just saying, Enerjak, maybe the next time that you build a fortress, you should make one that fire ants can't get into. Like, I don't know, I feel like modern builders are able to do this, so why not you? Also, here's a fun little side fact. I called Archimedes Archie in my Dr. Fenativis video, and that's because I'm a dummy who's only ever read his name, and I always assumed that it was pronounced Archimedes, which led to his nickname being Archie in my mind, but it's actually Archie, and it's something like Archimedes.
Archimedes. Archimedes.
The more you know, and I mean, I guess we all learn from the mistakes we make as kids. Now, of course, space isn't enough to stop Enerjak, and we'd see him return again as he blew up out of a Dimitri statue that the Dark Legion had. The Dark Legion, of course, are simps, and right away they kneeled for Enerjak, as he explained that he was Dimitri, and Dimitri was a character who they held in high regards due to his son founding this group. Enerjak would then go on to kidnap Knuckles, and would subject him to torture as he teleported him into space where he mostly just talked to him and tried to convince him to join him. Then he would teleport him into the ocean where Knuckles then had to fight off some sea beasts, and once Knuckles managed to fight off those beasts,
oh no!
Enerjak would then send him plummeting to the ground from thousands upon thousands of feet in the air, only to stop him in the last minute and demand that Knuckles bend the knee to him. Knuckles would go on to mock Enerjak's response by blowing a raspberry at him. This would lead to Enerjak, understandably, being pretty upset as he decided that, well, enough is enough with Knuckles, and picked him apart at the atomic level, ultimately destroying Knuckles completely and leaving no remains. Believing that Knuckles was dead, which, I mean, makes sense when he was destroyed from such a small molecular level, Enerjak would then go on to create a large golden arch, which would lead his people back to Echidnopolis, and he also, for good measures, tied up Knuckles' friends in the desert to leave them to their fate as they slowly cooked to death. Luckily, Knuckles was rescued by the Ancient Walkers. Knuckles then had a short moment to understand that he was rescued because of a bigger picture idea where the Ancient Walkers needed him for more things in the future. And before he could really say or think anything else, he was teleported back into the desert where he managed to rescue his friends. Now meanwhile at this point, Enerjak was long gone, as he was busy leading his people back to the Promised Land, while also fighting off the Echidna's longtime rival, the Dingoes, as well as the other Echidnas that didn't ultimately join the Dark Legion. Things actually ultimately would have worked out pretty well for him, as he was managing pretty competently to hold off both groups, but there was one little fact, which is that there was a being that was equally strong or maybe stronger than Enerjak that managed to get the best of him. This being in question is Mammoth Mogul, a character that we've seen in previous videos, and like Enerjak, he has a huge amount of control over chaos energy. At some point, I'm gonna have to make a video about this guy because he really shows up a lot throughout the Archie Sonic comics, but today isn't that day, so just know that he's a really strong mammoth who's been around for a really long time and has a ton of chaos power. Enerjak, being trapped under that rubble for so long, had really not anticipated to encounter such a powerful being now that he was back, which left him, understandably, pretty caught off guard. Mammoth Mogul then took this opportunity to pretty much belittle Enerjak and then siphon out all of his powers, leaving Dimitri alone without Enerjak inside of him anymore, as just a shriveled old man falling to the ground, only to be rescued by Knuckles. Now, a lot would happen from here with Enerjak, but I think that this is a pretty good stopping point, as we've gotten to see a lot about Enerjak from his conception all the way up until the modern day in the Sonic comics. We will pick up this story pretty shortly as we look at Enerjak going on into the future, but for now, we're going to take a break here. I want to thank everybody for watching this so far along, and if you enjoyed this and you think that I deserve a sub, a like, a comment, whatever, feel free to leave one. It really helps a lot and means an absolute ton to me to see them. I also have other videos that kind of are sort of tied to this, such as Dr. Fenativis, which is going to go into the next Enerjak. And then also on top of that, we've got this story about Titan Tales, which takes a look at the ancient walkers and Mammoth Mogul if you're curious to learn more about them. But at the end of the day, I just hope that you have a good one. Dimitri was a so many D's. Enerjak would enslave a Kidnopolis with its Enerjak would enslave, oh my god, what the heck, an unlucky ally. Unable to die due to his link with Enerjak, who still inhabited